Hello, everyone. So this will be a presentation on React state management, and we'll look at the state of state management in React throughout the years. So I'm Tom, software engineer here at Thoughtful. My background is in backend and data engineering with Scala, Java, and Apache Spark. And here at Thoughtful, I mostly work in Python, done some TypeScript, as well as AWS. This is our quick agenda. We're going to take a look at React state management, some common issues, and then we'll look at a few solutions that have come out throughout the years. So overall question, what is state? So as a general answer for engineers and non-engineers, state essentially describes the condition of your application at any point in time, whatever that time step might be. So state is essentially a data-driven change. So imagine where that data is coming from. It could be coming from you clicking a button. It could be coming from a time process. It could be coming from the sun setting and Mac turning on like ambient display or dark mode for you. What is management of state? The more complex your app gets, the more important this gets, since you could be managing many different things and a lot of data within your application. And essentially, state management is how are you going to store all of this data, and then how are you going to change the UI based on all these changes? Some common states in React are server states or remote state, global state, local states, and navigation states. You will not be covering much of navigation states. If you're a React developer, you should probably be using something like React Router. So I'll leave that for another talk. State management in React, React difference. So in React, the state is essentially the data structure that reflects the current state of the UI to the user. Since it was React 16.3, it's now possible to both use classes and functional components to manage states. Those of you that have been in React much longer realize that that was not always the case. And as developers, we need to define all of our components and all of the render functions, which change the components based on any change in the state. And when you think about a changed component state, how React works, it will simply re-render that component and all child components. And as a quick view, although most of you probably know, React uses something like a virtual DOM, which will not re-render everything on the page. So if you think of years back, any change that anybody made on a web page causes the entire page to reload. It is much more efficient to reload only a few boxes or components on a page. Some issues managing state in React that have come out throughout the years. One of those main issues is managing shared global state across your entire application. And prop drilling, or aka threading. This is an unofficial term for essentially passing data through many components that do not need it. So if you look at the quick traffic, imagine there's a user called Tom somewhere in that application above. That message is way below. Maybe that message says, hello, welcome, Tom. Imagine I have to pass that state throughout each component, even though that main page and content never cares about what my name is, which is quite inefficient. One other main thing is not only global or local, but a lot is required to manage state, obviously, outside of your applications, since many applications contact external APIs and so on. And we get to our first kind of solution. This is the first solution that really came out, one of the first implementations of the Flux pattern, which is a unidirectional data flow pattern used by Facebook, and Facebook is the developer of React. It was the first one to really gain widespread adoption among the community, since it solved a lot of the main problems that we had with managing state. But as with the early first comer, there are lots of pains with it. So we have learned, and spoiler alert, there have become other better options throughout the years. Some of the issues with React that people have complained about, it is overkill for small applications. It's very verbose, and there's lots of boilerplate that needs to be added. It does not address the problem, depending on the state of change. Yeah, depending on the state changes, it does not address all the problems, specifically something like remote states. And in reality, most of our applications now rely so much on external APIs and remote data that it's really important to synchronize the front end with the back end. And Redux, unfortunately, keeps all the states in a big monolithic structure or monolithic store, which exacerbates some problems of optimization later on. Shows click, oh, okay. Redux one more. Yeah. There you go. Well, helpful. All right. So I'll breeze through since we'll be going through a few examples here, but just to give you a quick view of Redux, we have our counter, which essentially is just going to be count how many times we click the buttons. An extremely simple use case. We need to initiate the state. We just do this here. We need to add, all of these are essentially boilerplate methods that we need to add to update the state of the application. And we also need to add it in our render application, and that changes the amount of times our button will show that it's been clicked. React hooks. Oh, but not quite yet. There's one more step. So a little bit later on, Context API became an official feature in React. And this allows one to share state across the entire app much more lightly and easily than with Redux. That's based on a consumer producer model where you will have your provider essentially provide state to all the children components that it is wrapping. We will show an example in 1 second. And using this Context API, you do not have to have all of the heaviness of React, and you can isolate specific use cases and use each in the proper place, in the proper components in your application. And a quick word on Context API versus Redux, since there's been much contention. And when this came out, lots of React developers wanted to abandon Redux completely and use Context API as their global state store. And it was never meant to be a complete replacement to Redux. It can be used together. And it is not a more complex global state management that has many features like React. It's very feature-less, but it does solve the problem of prop drilling that we mentioned earlier, of having to go through each of the components to address the one that you want. To context example. And this is a short example of context. Extremely simple. I'm just passing my name here into the provider here, and my user object is now able to retrieve it by wrapping it in a consumer object. Extremely simple, but we will build off of this, and it will keep getting better. React hooks. Hooks, what are hooks? Hooks are functions that let you hook into the React state and the lifecycle features directly from functional components. As you saw some of the previous examples were classes. This obviously favors a functional approach. Much less boilerplate to code to write. So let's see the difference. This is the most popular example of use state. Somebody already showed this in the previous demo briefly. So as an example, I'm just setting a state, which is just a number, and I don't need to do anything else except just in here. Again, it's a simple button. So if you look at first React, second with hooks, extremely much simpler example. Now we're going to go side by side. Another example. So this is an example of, just to see, this is around 47 lines of code. Not too simple yet, but just in this example, we are again just having two states, your first name and last name. That is being changed into an input field as you can imagine on the application. Now, let's look at the hook example, and that's 28. That's almost half as much code that you would have to write to accomplish essentially the same thing. This also uses an additional hook called useEffect, which mocks essentially those component will mount, component did mount, and updating essentially your window with the value that in this case, the user would set for their first or last name. Oh, and one more, use context. So we talked about React context, just to bring you back. So we have a provider and a consumer. We have to wrap the consumer to get the value. Wait, we can do that better. Now we have this use context hook, which is the same. So this is very similar to what you saw above, except now I don't need to wrap this in a consumer object. I just use this React use context to retrieve the value of the name. Some hook gotchas. Hooks are not a magic bullet. They're great, especially if you love functional programming. But some common gotchas for you. Never call hooks from inside a loop, condition, or a nested function. Hooks should always sit at the top level under components. Only call hooks from React functional components, and never call a hook from a regular function. And the great thing is, hooks can call other hooks. Here's some quick notes. There's a couple of new React hooks in React 18. Most of them here, a couple of them at least, are concurrent related, so you need to have concurrent mode activated. I'm not going to just describe all of them, but we're going to go over one real quick, and that's use transition. Otherwise, some of them should have pretty obvious meaning. Use deferred value, use ID, using external store, use insertion effect. Use transition, essentially if you have some process, maybe a heavier process, lighter, if you want to show some pending before a longer term process is resolved, you can use this hook, which actually returns function, which you wrap and wait for the value to be propagated in your application. Now, for the new kid on the block. So one of the newest, maybe there's a newer one, but one of the newest solutions for this is made by Facebook. It's a new state management library. It's not the official state management library for React, but it was developed by Facebook, and it seems to take a lot of the learnings from the past to address state management in React. And it's gaining popularity very quickly among the React community. Quick example here. Oh, it's a little bigger. So this is just a simple React app. We're just going to go through a few of the archetypes as you saw. So the main kind of thing in Recoil is atom. So every kind of state variable that you want to manage, you will declare as an atom. So this is just a user, which the user auth essentially permits you to, after authentication, to view the application. So this is a note-taking app, so to see your notes, you will have to register and log in, which we will do in a second. Similar with the notes, also needs to get the user auth object and the get note updated on to ensure that the note actually exists. And this is all then wrapped up. You will see a similar, oh, that's not it. There we go. So instead of the provider, as you saw with the context, Recoil root is essentially your kind of provider. And then instead of using use state, you would be using something like, well, you can't do this with use state. You can intermix these. So use set recoil state and get recoil value. So I've already launched this application. Let me just switch here. Oh, and that's small. All right, so let me just quickly go through an exercise here. Log in as register as myself. Log in as myself. Now I can see my notes. That's great. And that is almost there. Oh boy. And that's all, folks.